See, we have a total of 22 folks with us all together. That's nice. I'm Tom Shelley. I'm the chair of the Environmental Management Council of Tompkins County, or EMC as we call it. The EMC was formed about 30 years ago, and it was formed under a New York state law that encouraged counties to have environmental oversight from citizen committees like our council, and there are different types of those, but we're an Environmental Management Council. We report to the state legislature. We are advisory to the county legislature, rather. Specifically, we report to the PEAK committee, the Planning and Environmental Equality Group of the legislature. We advise the legislature on environmental issues, and we bring forth topics to the legislature that we think they need to consider in terms of environment in our county. We have about 17 members. Oh, we also report to the planning department. I work with the planning department staff. Darby Kiley and Kristen McCarthy here with us tonight have been invaluable in terms of us going forward and developing our programs. We have 17 standing members and a bunch of associate members. We also have several committees. We have a waste reduction committee working on a single-use plastic waste reduction. In our county, we have the UNA committee that looks after unique natural areas, of which we have almost 400 in the county. We have a climate advisory group that's working on climate adaptation and resiliency in the community. We're specifically working with Scott Doyle on developing a new emergency management plan for the county. And we have other groups that are doing other activities as well. So we have meetings once a month, usually the second Thursday around 4 or so. We have a series of speakers on various topics, most of which are very interesting. And these are lightly anyway, they've all been recorded and should be available to the public, probably on our website. And we're always looking for new members. If you have an specific interest in the environment, we have a number of positions that are open. You don't need any kind of expertise. We have people from people that have PhDs in specific topics down to ordinary folks like myself. And we always encourage new people to come to our meetings and see if they're interested. We have a website through the county also, Tompkins County website, so we're fairly easy to find there. I think this is going to be a really great program tonight. Obviously, environmental justice and its peripheral topics are kind of at the heart of what we're all about right now. And we'll see how it goes. The next few months will be pretty critical, as we can understand. Next few weeks, actually. Kate, do you want to take over and do a little bit of introduction of stuff that you're going to be doing?
Sure, happy to. I am Kate Darfler. I'm one of the 3 other vice chairs for the EMC. I've been on the EMC for a number of years. Thank you, Tom, for giving the scoop on the EMC. So as one thing I wanted to do before we kind of dive into the whole rest of the program is a lot has changed in 2020 for the world as a whole, but also for the EMC. Many of you know Brian Eden was the chairman of the EMC, and in January he retired from the EMC, and he'd given 10 years of service. And we can't thank him enough for everything that he's done over the years for the EMC. So thank you, Brian. I hope you see the recording, or maybe he'll join on at some point here. And then Tom Shelley, who you just heard from, had stepped forward to lead the board over the past year. And now Tom has announced he will be retiring as well in December. So we'll be looking for a new chair this winter. But we plan to keep the EMC strong. It's been great that we've moved to Zoom because now everything's virtual. It's really accessible and easy to get to. And we want to be a community connector on environmental issues. And to that end, we've been piloting kind of a new idea for the EMC is to kind of do this bi-weekly roundup email, which I've sort of taken a lead on, that hopes to be kind of a compilation of environmentally related events and happenings within Tompkins County. I've so far been sending it out to the EMC members, but we found it really useful because there are many different, you could be on everyone's newsletter and miss lots and lots of events. So I'm if you're interested in being on the distribution list, I'm gonna try to find a way to do it broader to the public. The email is tompkinscountyenvironmental@gmail.com. I will also stick it in the chat function right now. And if you would like to be added, please email me there, and I'm going to try to set up a Google group so you can get that email. And it's, normally a spreadsheet of the calendar of events and then a few bullet points pulled out. And then I also track what's going on in the DEC. So you get to see what that's happening at the DEC level for Tompkins County related things. So housekeeping for this webinar. So we'd ask you to put your questions and comments into the Q&A feature, which is down there, rather than the chat function. If you just want to say hi to different people or talk to the panelists, but we'll be looking at the Q&A list when we kind of come to questions, and questions will be done at the end of all three speakers that we have. And that'll help us. We also have the ability to have you raise your hand if you want to have a live kind of back and forth or conversation if you don't feel like typing. So you can also raise your hand, but we will wait until the end of the three speakers before we bring on anyone to speak. Your video will not be on, but you will be on audio to be able to chat with the panelists. So the main event. So the EPA defines environmental justice as, quote, the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulation, and policies. These goals will be achieved when everyone enjoys the same degree of protection from environmental health hazards and equal access to the decision-making processes to have a healthy environment in which to live, learn, and work. Now, Tompkins County is not insulated from environmental justice issues, although we've often heard about extreme cases of environmental injustices across the nation, whether it's a sighting of an oil pipeline, lead in water sources, years of inaction from a polluting power plant. There are also local challenges that require our hearts and minds. And to give us a few insights on those challenges, I'm going to turn it over to Richard and ask him to introduce himself. Yeah, unmute. There you go.
Thank you. All right.
Awesome.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Yes, I'm going to speak about environmental justice. First, I want to work with the definition of the EPA's definition of environmental justice, which has an underlying assumption that everyone in the community is a full and complete member of that community, that they are engaged in the civic, social, and political life of that community and are not excluded. And that's where the fault line lies at, right? Who is included and who is excluded from the social and political life of the community. I want to bring up a salient point. I'm going to talk about three things. I'm going to talk about spaces. I'm going to talk about how those spaces define who lives in those spaces and how the people that live in those spaces shape those spaces. So there is sort of like a dialectical relationship between the individuals that occupy those spaces and how those spaces are conceived and perceived and lived. And then I want to talk about how this dialectic relationship defines who lives and who dies in the community. For that, I'm going to talk about the space that we're all familiar with, the space called the jungle, which has been in existence for over 100 years. It's the space at the west side of Ithaca at the inlet of Cayuga Lake. This space has been variously known as the Rhine, the city dump, Silent City, and has always been a place for squatters. And today's reiteration of that space is called the jungle. And it's a space that is fluid and takes up an area from about behind Agways. The place used to be called the Octopus, Buffalo and State Street, up to Buffalo Wings, down by that space over there. This space, recently this place has been constructed and has been stripped over. During a couple of years ago, there was a a woman that lived in the space called Nate's Estates, is a retirement home. And she was doing gardening, and she's digging in there, and she says she runs into a canister or some other debris and realizes that the space that she's living in, where this retirement home was constructed on, used to be the city dump. That whole area, as a matter of fact, was called the city dump. The whole area known as the jungle was the city dump. And it wasn't to this lady, retiree, made some noise about this, that people started drawing attention to the fact that this was, in fact, a landfill that had been uncapped and remains uncapped. It is the only landfill in New York State that is uncapped. A review of the historical record shows that this place was used to dump herbicides, pollutants from sanitary facilities. Anything that was dumped there and wasn't clean. It was just turned over with about 1.5 to 3 feet of dirt, and they started building residential areas there. The places where the homeless people inhabit now, the spaces behind agways have not been capped and remain spaces where people live. People live in toxified spaces. But that's not the story. The story is that when we have a place called a jungle, and we pick up a newspaper, and anybody picks up the newspaper and knows what the space the jungle is, there is a certain narrative attached to that space. That's a space that is uncivil, that is lawless, that is a place where people are doing drugs, where people are hiding from the cops, where people are engaged in sex trafficking, sex workers live there. And that is not the truth. I have been working in that space for about a year now, and I have come to know those people. And I can tell you for a fact that our interpretation of this space as conceived from the outside is nothing to the reality of this space. These are human beings living there. Human beings that for some reason or another cannot function in society. We have people there that have mental health issues, substance abuse issues, are poor, have been evicted from their homes, and for some reason have not been able to effectively work their way into the civil and social and political life of the community. So for those reasons, they have been sort of excluded because they have been deemed incapable of functioning like anybody else in the community. And it is the production of that idea, right? The idea that the people in these spaces are unfit for society that allows us to treat them as less than human. And that is where environmental justice really becomes a salient idea, right? And the idea that because these individuals are occupying these spaces, they are deserving of those spaces. They are deserving to live in dumps because they are broken human beings. And that's the idea that challenges our idea of what it means to be a just society, a society that respects the dignity of other human beings. And that is the problem. The problem is that in certain environments, people are allowed to live because they're somehow deemed to be less than worthy of life. And a couple of weeks ago, about 8 weeks ago, we had a child born in the encampment. This child was born to a man and woman that have been living in the encampment for like 3 years. And when news got out that this child had been born in the encampment, an army of officers were sent to recover the child, 18 officers, despite the fact that it was the family that had called for medical treatment. And that's the way we see these people. We see these people that they are incapable of taking care of a child, that the child was somehow endangered, that they're fiends and they're monsters. But that narrative is not the truth, of course. The woman who had the child has since been housed, has visited her child because the child was taken, of course, and has made every visit with the child and is currently in court trying to get her child back. And that is about the stories we tell ourselves about these folks, right? That is about the story we tell about these spaces. At the west end, we have this space called a city dump. And this space has been historically inhabited by individuals who are poor, suffer from mental illness, have substance abuse problems. And this has been going on for over 40 years. And this space has gone through different reiterations that tend to define that space as a negative space. Silent City, the Rhine, the jungle, the city dump. And because the individuals that are associated with those spaces are poor, have mental health issues, and are substance abuse users, they're also deemed to be garbage, less than human, and excluded from the social and political life of the community. And that is problematic. And that is where social justice or environmental justice meets the lived experience of an individual. Yeah, that's about it. Hello, am I frozen?
Yeah, no, thank you, Richard. Next, oh my gosh, I don't even have the schedule in front of me. Is it Rebecca, are you up next?
Rebecca.
Yeah, I think that's me. I feel like such a dork. I have a PowerPoint that I'm gonna share, if that's all right. Let's see. Can y'all see that? Hopefully,
yes.
Okay, cool. So I'm Rebecca Evans. I am currently the campus sustainability coordinator at Ithaca College. Outside of that, I work with a couple of local organizations, and outside of that, my life is fairly uninteresting. But I want to start this. This is typically how I start. This is kind of a doctored version of a presentation that I give to a lot of students that I see. I kind of regret agreeing to go after Richard, because that was a really powerful story that you just told. And also now we're just going to really depress the rest of you guys. But I'd like to start this with this piece of art by a Puerto Rican artist named Ricardo Levins Morales. He does a really, really great job of weaving together social justice and traditionally environmental issues. If you can't read what that says, it says environmental justice is our cry of defiance against the onslaught of oppressive toxins and toxic oppressions that threaten to submerge our homes. I really, really love this quote, and I really, really love this print, because I think the key that he's really got here is that the root of all of these issues is in oppression, and it's in extraction. But I'm going to go really, really fast through this as a fair warning. One, because it's a lot of information, and two, because I think it's the only way that I'm going to keep everybody awake through this. But I'm going to try and make some connections between environmental destruction and human health. We're going to focus particularly on some health disparities between different populations. And the way that we're going to do that is take a look at some specific case studies across the United States. Most of these you're probably, or maybe all of these you're really familiar with, so it shouldn't necessarily be new, but we will look at things maybe through a different lens. So to start on screen, you can see some health disparities on the left between Black Americans and white Americans, and on the right between Latinx Americans and white adults. The numbers that you see here really are not important. What I want you to keep in mind is the trend. And the other thing that I want to acknowledge before we dive in here is that obviously healthcare and access to healthcare plays a really, really big role in the outcomes in a lot of these conditions. But hopefully tonight we can start making some other and possibly new connections between health and the environment as well. So this is a really, really, really brief overview of environmental justice, and you might hear me call it EJ. In the United States. It starts in 1968 only because that's typically where we see the timeline of civil rights drop off. I consider environmental justice very much part of that civil rights fight. And hopefully at the end of this presentations tonight. You guys do too. And it ends in 2005, candidly, only because I ran out of room on this slide. It's definitely not over. We're still working towards this today. So I'm going to highlight just a couple of items on this timeline. The first is the Warren County PCB landfill in 1982. This was arguably the start of the environmental justice movement. And it started when PCBs were illegally dumped on the side of the road, which led to building a PCB landfill in Warren County, North Carolina, where 69% of the population identifies as Black. And at the time, interestingly, this community didn't have any political representation, which is really, really key. If you're not familiar, PCBs are a known carcinogen, and they're really, really dangerous. One, because they bioaccumulate. So the further you get up in the food chain, the stronger their potency is in the body. And they also are able to travel really, really far distances by land, water, and soil. And they don't actually sustain any damage. So when they are in a landfill, they're not going to break down once they reach groundwater, which means if you live on a well, they're super, super dangerous. Most notably, though, when they started to investigate why they chose this particular site for the landfill, they found that it wasn't actually based on any scientific criteria like it should be, like how quickly can these things break down here? Is there a water source close by that could be contaminated? They actually found that demographics were the deciding factor of where this particular landfill was placed. The other thing to note is that remediation of this site actually wasn't complete until 2001. So it's a very, very long and arduous process. That second item is a UCC study in 1987. That's the United Church of Christ. They published a study called Toxic Waste and Race. And what it found was that 15 million African Americans, 8 million, what they called at the time, Hispanics, half of all Asian Pacific Islanders and Native Americans all lived near at least one toxic waste site all across the nation. And this was the first national effort to really try and make a connection between race, socioeconomics, and the environment. And what they found was that although socioeconomics did play a role, race was actually the most significant and determinant factor of whether or not you live close to one of these sites. In some more positive news, the next year, 1988, WE Act was founded. This was one of the first and still very much one of the most prominent activist groups fighting for environmental justice in the United States. It was founded in East Harlem, and they were really dedicated to some really hyper-local issues that they were facing with bus depots and with sewage treatment facilities. And they've gone from a small group of 3 people and their friends to they're now a real power player in a nationwide organization. All right, so we're going to take a look at a couple of case studies. That map, those 2 maps there are both of Cancer Alley in Louisiana from 2013. If you're not familiar with Cancer Alley, it's the colloquial name given to this 85-mile stretch from Baton Rouge to New Orleans, all around the Mississippi River. It's home to about 150 plants and refineries, including some big names like Danka and ExxonMobil. And if you look at those maps, I'm hoping that you can, the details aren't necessarily important, but those orange spots are industrial sites. And in that left-hand map, the blue blocks they represent the percentage of the population that identifies as Black. And on the right, that's income brackets are represented by those blue blocks. So this really just hammers home that the UCC study is by no means outdated. This is still happening today. Race is definitely still a determinant factor in where these hazardous waste sites are located. But I want to return back to Danka really quickly. So Danka is responsible for 99% of the country's chloroprene emissions. And chloroprene is a gas that is produced when we try and produce things like rubbers. So neoprene in particular, wetsuits, and I have a bunch of neoprene beer koozies, that sort of thing. Chloroprene is a byproduct of that. And the EPA considers chloroprene a likely carcinogen. So we're not entirely sure that it causes cancer, but we're pretty sure that it does. So they have set a suggested, and if I was typing this, I would underline suggested 100 times, an upper threshold of about 156 times lower than what Danka actually emits of chloroprene. And the reason that they do that is Danka is basically saying, we don't believe your science. Doesn't that sound familiar nowadays? So we're going to do whatever we want because we want to make some money. So let's take a look at what that actually means for people that are living here. This is a map. It's the 2011 National Air Toxics Assessment map. That's always a tongue twister for me. And what it does is it basically determines the likelihood of any individual getting cancer depending on where you live in the United States. So your risk is based on a chance of X in 1 million. So like you can see in this map, most of the United States is relatively low, and it's relatively constant too, about a chance of 30 in a million of getting cancer. If we zoom in a little bit, this is Cancer Alley. So already our risk has jumped to twice that of the rest of the United States. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. Those green circles are industrial sites. And if we zoom in just a little bit more, this is St. John the Baptist Parish. That little yellow circle is Denka. You can see that your risk of getting cancer in this location is over 10 times that of the rest of the United States. And why am I saying this? Why is this important? What we're seeing here and across the United States is that corporations are operating with absolutely zero concern for human well-being. And this isn't necessarily an American problem. This is a values problem all across the United States, that we are valuing the dollar more than we're valuing human lives. I told you I'm going to run through this really, really quickly. So next to air, water is arguably our most vital resource, at least to human life, definitely. So we're going to take a look at Flint, Michigan, which, I'm sure everyone is really familiar with what's going on in Flint. So I'm not going to go into too much background here. But a couple of things to keep in mind is that 50% of Flint residents identify as Black, and 42% of Flint residents fall below the federal poverty line. So I'm going to leave this graphic up while I continue talking. It's going to be a lot of information. But this is how lead affects children in particular. And what I'm hoping we'll take home from this is the interconnected nature of environmental destruction, human health, and our economy. So just stick with me here. A little additional context: the city swapped water suppliers to save roughly $5 million during a period of bankruptcy. Since then, it's been estimated that about 8,000 children have been exposed to lead contamination from drinking city water. Now, this data is from 2016. Columbia University did a study to try and calculate the lifetime social costs of this damage, including loss of economic productivity, increased reliance on welfare system, and cost to the criminal justice system. And this is all based on the known effects of lead, particularly on the brain, like we can see in this diagram. And again, this is just children. This doesn't include adults. So what Columbia found, they estimated that the cost was actually about $50,000 per child. Now, I'm not a mathematician, and in case anyone on here also is not a mathematician or generally not good at math unless you have a cell phone in front of you, that's roughly $400 million, all because the city had this short-sighted vision to save $5 million right now. And again, why is this important? We're in a position right now where we can look short-sighted at the economic position we're in right now because of COVID, and we can put off climate work, or we can look to the future and think about what kind of planet we want to have 10, 30, 50 years from now for our children. I know all of that sounds a little hypothetical. $400 million seems like a lot. How can we really know? What do the people at Columbia even know about this? But the headlines are showing us that this is real. These are real human lives that are being affected by this. So I'm hoping that you've seen some of these headlines before. And if you haven't, I implore you to ask yourself why. Why haven't we seen this? Why isn't this in the news? And why isn't it still in the news? If we aren't hearing about 8,000 sick kids and a $400 million loss, then what else across the United States are we not hearing about? All right, another quick pivot. This probably looks a little bit familiar, but one other thing I want to mention is that when we talk about human health, we're not just talking about physical bodily health, right? We can also talk about culture, and we can talk about resource access. So this probably looks pretty familiar to you, or to some of you at least. This is a New York City High Line that transformed a dilapidated 1930s railroad into a public park in the early 2000s. A couple of highlights of this treasured West Side asset: hosts about 20 million visitors per year. At planning, it was estimated to generate about $200 million in real estate taxes for the state of New York, which was less than the cost of the estimated cost of the project. And by 2038, it's estimated to generate about $900 million for New York City. It also features sustainable native plant life, many of which were actually growing in this area before they started construction on the High Line. And overall, this is a an open public green space that offers, you know, a necessary green escape for what we otherwise consider the concrete jungle. So what the heck is the problem? We raised property values, we increased funding for the city, and we brought in new business. These are all really, really good things. But then we have to ask ourselves, what happened to the families and the businesses, the things that make up a community? What happened to them? Where were they? Candidly, they were displaced. And there's actually, this is a newly coined concept called eco-gentrification, where we are replacing existing communities with public green spaces or other green amenities like sustainable condos or apartments, and basically just telling the people, too bad this is going up. So what happened in West Chelsea? We saw multi-generational businesses closed after decades of business. We saw rents quintuple in some cases. We saw property values rise 103%. And of course, this is all very bad. But on top of all of that, the High Line is located next to multiple public housing projects with really high populations of Black and Brown people. But when we actually look at who's using the High Line, less than 7% of those people are Black or Latinx. So it doesn't even serve the people that made this a community to begin with. So I'm gonna leave you, I told you it was gonna go really fast. I'm gonna leave you with this little cartoon that I think sums this up really nicely. It says, Dr. Dan, I wonder if you could explain to our listeners what gentrification means. For sure, it works like this. A developer buys a dilapidated house in a depressed neighborhood. He fixes it up and resells it to a young middle-class couple. This encourages other gentry to buy into the neighborhood. And before long, a fantastic real estate market booms where none existed before. And what happens to low-income tenants who are displaced? Does anyone care? Sure we do. These people are very important to the whole process. They are, of course. They move on to devalue other properties. Without them, the entire system falls apart. So I think what this really hammers home, it touches on what Richard's point was and what I think Anne plans to talk about too, which is this issue of disposability and putting property value over the value of human life. So I hope that this was really helpful, and I'm really happy to pass this on to my good friend and colleague, Anne.
Anne, go ahead and introduce yourself and take it away.
I'm taking it away. I'm Anne Rhodes. I work part-time for Cornell Cooperative Extension of Tompkins County on the energy and climate change team. I also do a lot of anti-racism work in the community with SURGE and the Rural Listening Project, and a couple of other groups. So first, I want to acknowledge that we are here tonight on land that was home to and belongs to the Onondaga and the Cayuga peoples, land that was never ceded to white people. So thinking about the climate crisis and seeing how it's connected with racial inequality, both historically and currently, and also locally, as Richard was referring to, we're beginning to realize that these two crises are very deeply interconnected. Rebecca's and Richard's examples make it clear that these two crises cause each other, and they also share root causes. So exploring those interconnections is critical to solving both the crises. Issues that are this complicated require systems thinking. Systems thinking is the ability to understand a complex system where many parts are interrelated and influence each other. So in thinking about the root causes and the interconnections of the climate crisis and racist inequality, and after listening to many people's thoughts on this, Rebecca and I have begun to identify some ways to conceptualize what needs to change in order to realize the outcomes that we all want. The carbon outcomes, the racism outcomes, the health outcomes, and the economic outcomes. We all have an opportunity now to identify the worldviews and the mindsets that have led us to this moment. The framers of the Green New Deal acknowledge this interconnection by pointing out that the urgent and comprehensive response to the climate crisis can also create millions of new jobs, lifting people out of poverty and addressing economic inequality. Our local Green New Deal proposals in the city of Ithaca and the town of Ithaca are also explicit about addressing equity. So how do we begin to think about all this? I remember Kirby Edmonds saying once at a workshop, as he was talking about organizations trying to make decisions about a particular problem and which actions they want to take to solve that problem, he said, so say there are a lot of people dealing drugs in our community. There are many ways to solve that problem. One way to solve it would be to just shoot everybody who deals in drugs. That would take care of it quickly. But we don't do that because it violates our values. This resonates with me in the current situation for some obvious reasons about who gets shot and who doesn't. Because it points to the importance of thinking about our values and taking these values into consideration when we're making decisions, decisions about sustainability and everything else. Excuse me. If we think about sustainability within the wider context of racism, economic inequality, and a health crisis, and we remember our values in each of these issues, who and what is important, who and what needs to be taken into consideration and protected and respected and included, then we will make better decisions about how to proceed. So what are the values that we need to be operating by? One connection among all these crises is the concept of disposability. Richard talked about throwaway people, and Rebecca talked about disposable communities. Disposability of certain communities, of people with certain identities, disposability of species, pollinators, forests, aquifers, frontline workers, people in nursing homes and meatpacking plants. This is a pretty foundational idea in this country, considering slavery and removal of Native American communities. So it's pretty entrenched. But at this moment, it's all becoming very obvious to us what's really going on here and the damage that is being done. Things are getting more obvious. It's becoming ever more obvious that we have to change this and that we have to begin to value all people and sustain all life. So approaching our work, your work, my work, with these values in mind, we can choose ways that we need to change, structures that we need to change, policies that need to be enacted, habits to change that these changes will actually address all these crises at once. One way to think about this unprecedented time is captured in a quote from Arundhati Roy, which characterizes this as a time of transformation, as if we are walking through a portal, a doorway. Can we put that quote up, Rebecca? This is a one-way portal. Because although health crises have come and gone and economic crises have resolved themselves as the pendulum swings the other way, the climate pendulum will not swing back. This is a unique time in human history, a transformational time. Thinking about the mindsets and the worldviews and the habits that got us here will help us understand what and how to change. This is not a time for reform or for a return to normal. Normal is what got us here. So what will we leave behind? Arundhati Roy is asking us, we can choose to walk through this portal, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, etc. or we can walk through lightly. What's one thing that you would like to see us leave behind in this transformational time as we walk through this portal? Think of one thing that you would like to have us leave behind and put it in the chat. I would like to leave behind any willingness that we may have to put up with, to tolerate the situation as it has been. Don't hesitate, go ahead, put something in the chat. We're gonna keep the chat and you'll be able to see the things that people feel are necessary to leave behind. And what will we take with us through this portal? What are your ideas? At the minimum, I hope that we can take each other through this doorway, all of us, leaving no one behind. So stay connected and connect with other people across race and class and place, and listen and identify shared values and mobilize. We need each other to make this happen. We can't do it alone or within one organization or one municipality or one business. We need each other. We are literally all in this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. And if you're putting in the chat, if you want everyone to see it, make sure you're doing it to panelists and attendees. And if not, the panelists are seeing what you're putting in there. And that's fantastic. This is a question to all of three of you. Thank you very much first for taking the time and coming here. Are you aware of any volunteer opportunities or other avenues for citizens to get involved in environmental justice initiatives, specifically at the local level?
Yes, at the local level, people are making the homeless encampments permanent places. Some of them have been there for years. There's a lot of debris, there's a lot of garbage, there's a lot of waste. I would like to see an initiative to clean that up. I would like to see some dumpsters put out there so people could throw stuff in there and removed. I would like this to be done at the city's expense. And I would like to see volunteers help out and pack some of this stuff up. Just put some gloves on, wear some boots, some good jeans, and I'll be out there to help you do it. So I would like to see that initiative at least.
There's an effort happening locally called Mutual Aid, which is an informal, community-based solution to people who are suffering financially, who don't have enough food. For example, you may have seen little blue cabinets showing up all around town, where people who have a little bit extra are putting stuff in the cabinets, food, diapers, sanitary wipes, whatever, toilet paper, and people who need it are taking it. This is an opportunity to share and to provide things so that people, why don't you just adopt one of these blue cabinets as yours, and you and your friends can just say, this is our cabinet. We're gonna make sure it's always full, always full. Doesn't matter who comes and takes it, people will come and take it who need it. There are also efforts through Mutual Aid, Tompkins County, of people offering rides to people who need to get to medical appointments or court appointments. There are things that are happening to help people who are previously incarcerated or just coming out of incarceration. Some of these efforts are at Cooperative Extension. So maybe we could put together a list of resources and make it available to you, Kate, and opportunities for people to volunteer.
I would love to be able to push that out and help for the EMC to be a place to get it out into the community. So please, and anyone else, even not our panelists, if you have other ideas of opportunities that we're not seeing here, email the EMC members, put it in the chat function. Maybe panelists, you could put your email addresses if you're comfortable into the chat function so people can see it. They could email us all as a whole, and we can work on a compilation list. Another question came up to Richard. Could you speak about your experience helping the jungle residents to relocate for the city's dredging project?
In March of this year, as Cuomo put out a mandate that no one is supposed to get evicted from their places, the city of Ithaca decided, or it's really the state project, but the city of Ithaca decided to start relocating the people that were behind those so they could dredge that area to build a dewatering facility. It was approximately 12 people there. It was cold. These individuals have been living in these spaces for over 2 years and less. This was their home. So they promised that they could live in other spaces. So it had a crazy effect. So they decided to relocate these folks. This place had abandoned meth labs, had thousands of used syringes that I was picking up slowly, me and a team from staff. It had filth, it had dirt, it had lead, it had a bunch of stuff. The city decided to move these folks, and they just turned the dirt over as they moved these folks. And it was me and Carmen Guidi at the very end, just dragging people out as the backhoes were coming down on their house. Carmen Guidi, who's an incredible individual, he's the founder of Second Wind Cottages. He's been working in the encampment for years. Decided that we were going to get arrested for this because these individuals had to be treated with dignity and respect, and that this was their home, and that they were not going to start destroying their homes until we walked these folks away. I informed Carmen that I'm a formerly incarcerated person who was currently on parole, and I could not get arrested for this project. So I had to convince them not to be crazy about it. So we did move them, and it was terrible, but it had the effect of having these people relocate to spaces with individuals that they really get along with. So they form these little communities in these other spaces. And now we have these little nodes of matriarchs and patriarchal communities that function in that way. And they have a sense of validation because the city told them to move to these other spaces. Now they feel that the city gave them permission to live in those spaces and that they're validated in their existence, which is an incredible phenomenon. So the things that happen in the encampments is just ongoing, it's organic, and you can see the incredible relationships and the norms and the ideas that are formed and how they help each other and the codes. And so it's an incredible place. And I would invite people not to just read the Ithaca Journal and think that there's a violent place, because that's the only thing they're going to report. But go there and give somebody a coat, give somebody a blanket, some hand warmers, a sleeping bag, a tent, a tarp. These people are not camping, they're living out there. So don't bring camping stuff. Keep that home. Bring stuff that will help them live the winter and survive the winter.
Excellent, thank you. All right, we're getting a couple questions in the Q&A, and some are a little wordy, so I'll ask the panelists also to take a look at them as I read them out here. We have one from Michelle. She asks about, in 2018 and 2019, they saw a push in the Water Resources Council by Cynthia Brock to understand the depth of contaminants present in the city dump. What is the known current status of the potential environmental gentrification of the only city trailer park on an uncapped landfill? I don't know if someone can answer that one.
I got something to say. Maybe other people have, but I got something to say. This used to be the landfill to 1970, right? I have found documents of inspectors that have gone to this landfill and found uncapped drums containing herbicides that have been proven to be carcinogens. These chemicals were dumped in there, 2,4,5-T herbicides mixed with other herbicides is what produced Agent Orange, and the chemical that was used during the Vietnam War to just practically raise jungles and kill all the vegetation. These landfills have not been capped. They have not been cleaned. They've been covered by 1.5 to 3 feet of dirt, and they started just building residential areas there, or making an area for homeless populations. It's just horrible, and so no one knows. No one knows because these landfills have never been capped. The chemicals that were there were never recovered. Nothing has happened, and so we don't know what the water contamination is at this point.
So the last I heard about it, and it was some months ago, so this may not be up to date, was that Cynthia was very concerned about it and wanted to immediately do something about it. And other people on the council said, you can't just push these people out of their homes and tell them, move, go, leave. We have to take care of this. So it immediately becomes way more complex, just like in the jungle. People have to move, but it's not their responsibility that they were located on a dump. And yet you're going to take their homes away from them and their neighborhoods and their neighbors and the culture that they've developed there. And no, it's way more complicated. This is what I'm talking about values, about we have to honor all the pieces of this puzzle at the same time. So it becomes way more complex, and we need to create another living situation for people who are on the dump. And it needs to be up to them what that living situation is going to be. They need to have a voice in deciding where they're going and how they're going to live. So this is complex. Go for it, Richard.
Earlier on, Rebecca spoke about this process of gentrification. Like, for example, the Highland is a great example. And I've been thinking along those lines, but and these places are made because they are made to replace slums, right? But slums don't just come out of nowhere, right? Slums were at one time there were great houses, great apartments for people, middle-class people and all that. And there's a process that I think precedes gentrification that I'm playing with the idea of slumification. And that's the idea that municipalities and governments remove resources from this community. Business start leaving, other populations start moving in, other populations start moving out. There's a process that leads and sets the stage for this gentrification. The disconnect is that these places take generations to become slums. And by the time they become slum and they become regentrified and people are dislocated and moved out, we have 2 or 3 or 4 generations of Hispanic living in the Lower East Side before they decide to put the highlight and kick us out of there. You know what I mean? And that's where the problem lies, right? It destabilizes families. It disrupts families, but it disrupts those families that don't have the economic resources to assert their right, to make themselves visible, to be deemed of enough value to have a voice.
Excellent. And to tag on that, I guess I had a question about, we report to the county ledge. We always are talking about policies. There's policies at many different levels that we can look at. There's policies at the federal level, the state level, our local county level, the cities and towns. And so what are policies that you guys have either come up against or heard about that need changing and tweaking? Not, complete, or maybe completely new policies that need revisions at particularly the local level. We've heard a lot of the state and the federal level, but what are policies at the local level that could really help this environmental justice movement and some of the issues that you've talked about?
I have one that's at the top of my list and has been for some time. Richard is laughing at me. Of course you do, Anne. And that is that 70% of the homes in the city of Ithaca are rental properties. The city, because of its goals in the Green New Deal, has committed to carbon neutrality by 2030, less than 10 years away. Carbon neutrality means we can't be heating all the buildings in the city of Ithaca with natural gas. All of them have to be upgraded for energy efficiency. All the buildings have to be switched over to heat pumps. No more natural gas. None. Zero. Tomorrow. So if we think about 70% of the homes in the city being rental properties, this puts an enormous pressure on landlords to upgrade their properties and switch over to renewable heat. And the danger there is that they will pass that cost on to their tenants as quickly as possible. And that'll raise all the rents in the city. And we'll see a massive exodus from the city of people moving out to where they can afford to live, which is Newfield and Groton and McLean and et cetera. And then we have no transportation into their jobs, no way to get to medical appointments. We've disrupted whole communities. So this is a policy that needs to happen. We need a policy that's going to not punish landlords, but support them to make the changes that they need to make, and have some kind of rent control or rent stabilization so that people are protected and their rents are not going to triple or quadruple because of the energy efficiency costs. There, I said it.
Rent control, I support it. And I also think that we have, and I did a study, a mini study on this, on the availability of affordable housing. And that's a major problem in Ithaca. The problem has to do a lot with that. This is a college town. You have Ithaca College, you have Cornell, and when the students come in, the landlord wants to rent to them. A person who appears to a landlord with a voucher from DSS comes inscribed as a person of ill repute for it. You know, this person is getting public assistance. Why, right? Why isn't this person working? And it's only $400. And no landlord is going to rent an Ithaca for $400 when they could rent to a student for $1,200 whose parents are going to back up that rent, you know what I mean? So what it does, it creates spaces for unscrupulous landlords. And there, I said it, Narfi, right? He has these apartments throughout this town, throughout Ithaca, that are just infested with vermin. They're nasty, they're small. He makes 10 apartments out of a house and has the people that I work with living in these spaces. And it makes it impossible for these individuals to succeed when they move from the jungle into these apartments that are worse than the areas that they had inhabited prior to that. So yeah, rent control, and maybe Cornell could give some property so we could build affordable housing.
Just to piggyback on both of those comments, I haven't been in Ithaca very long, so I don't know that I can necessarily speak to the local issues, but before I moved here, I worked on a climate action plan for the city of Richmond in Central Virginia. And one of the things that we butted up against fairly often was zoning and how different locations are zoned, whether it's for mixed use or not. And the challenge that presents in urban planning. Oh, hi, puppy. But one of the solutions that Chicago has found when they built the 606, which is essentially the Chicagoan version of the High Line, during the permitting process, if you are building a structure that exceeds a certain number of square feet or density, then you are required to pay a tax that goes into a fund that exclusively is used for public housing. Is it popular with developers? Probably not. Is it popular with people that need housing? Yeah. But that's, I mean, again, we're talking about a values shift among legislators and among people that live there. And I think that the question is, who are we building policies for, right? Are we building it for the people that live here or for the people that build here? And when we're actually creating those policies, who's at that table and who owns that table? And to Anne's point, you know, are the relationships that we're forming when we invite people to the table, are they transactional or are they transformative? I think, you know, there's no quick silver bullet for this. This is going to take real work. This isn't to create a policy in the world as rainbows and peace signs. We need to rebuild this entire place, the entire world, our entire value system.
Okay, let's go.
Yeah. So we have our work cut out for us, to say the least.
I want to add on this note, you know, the essayist and philosopher and writer, David Foster Wallace, in his famous commencement speech about This Is Water, right? He ends by saying that to be selfish, to be mean, to be just to be, it's our default mode to be selfish, right? To be selfless, to be giving, to be caring, to be compassionate is a conscious effort. We have to have this mindset that I want to help others, that you want to do right, that you care about human beings, and you have to be conscious of that on a regular basis. And that is the message that Anne led off with when she spoke, right? That we have to keep our mind on the prize. And the prize is that every human being is worthy of being treated with dignity and respect. You know what I mean? And that's just a simple principle. It's not hard. And I think that practice becomes a habit and it becomes ingrained in our character. And when we see somebody in the street that's really has mental health issues, that has substance abuse issues, that is poor, that is Black, that is brown, that is short, that is fat, that is woman, that is gay, please keep in mind to treat them with compassion and respect. And that is it. I mean, we have an individual that walks around town dancing, right? Everybody knows this individual, right? He dresses in different styles every time, and he's dancing and talking to himself. And he's so spectacular that he has become invisible in Ithaca. Stop and ask him how he's doing. He's going to answer. Don't shy away from him. Don't turn your eye on him. He's part of Ithaca. I think he represents Ithaca. And I hate to use him as a metaphor, but I think he is a metaphor for Ithaca, for all of us.
Couldn't end on a better note. Thank you to Richard and Anne and Rebecca. That was amazing. To those who are joining us, this is recorded and will be up on I believe the EMC website. Also, the panelists and all of our emails are in the chat. So if you have additional questions, please feel free to get in touch. I want to thank you all and good night.
Please don't hesitate to follow up with any of us. We're really committed to making this change happen.
Yes.